Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Monday, July 6th, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. The weather in Riverside is looking warm today, with a high of 92.1 degrees and a low of 65.4 degrees, so be sure to stay hydrated if you are spending time outdoors. We have a busy show ahead of us. We will examine what a recent fatal shooting reveals about the operations of the Memphis Safe Task Force. We are also taking a closer look at why OPEC Plus has decided to modestly increase oil production. Along with these topics, we will be covering a variety of other important headlines from across the country. All of this and more on Alex's News. Stay tuned. Good morning, everyone. We're following a deadly shooting in downtown Memphis involving members of the Tennessee National Guard. It happened just yesterday. For the details, we're joined by our reporter, Ethan. Ethan, good morning. What exactly happened here?
Good morning, Grace. So this unfolded early Sunday, July 5th, 2026, around 4 a.m. in downtown Memphis. According to PBS NewsHour, CNN, and ABC News, Memphis Police and National Guard members were responding to reports of gunshots. That's when they say they spotted an armed man running away on foot. 2 Guard members ended up fatally shooting him near Ida B. Wells Avenue and Gayoso Avenue.
And who was the young man who was killed?
His name was Tyron Johnson, and he was just 20 years old. Authorities say that during the pursuit, Johnson turned toward the soldiers with his weapon, and that's when the guardsmen opened fire. After the shooting, 2 National Guard medical specialists tried to provide first aid. But Lieutenant Colonel Darren Haas, a Guard spokesperson, confirmed that Johnson died right there at the scene.
Do we know how many times he was shot?
Officially, no authorities haven't commented on the exact number of shots fired, but Johnson's family says they were told more. His 46-year-old cousin, Terrical Nelson, spoke with the Associated Press, and that account was carried by both PBS NewsHour and CNN. Nelson said family members were informed that Johnson had been shot twice in the chest.
What are you learning about Tyron Johnson himself?
His family paints a picture of a young man with a really bright future. His grandfather, Evanuel Johnson, told CNN and ABC News that Tyron was the father of a young child and a passionate musician. He'd taken classes at Tennessee State University, and he was preparing to help lead the family's construction business. It's worth noting, a search of federal and state court records turned up no criminal cases tied to Johnson. Local records in Nashville and Memphis only showed a few minor traffic violations.
Now, these were National Guard members. Why were they there in the first place?
Right, and that's really the heart of the story. The soldiers involved are part of what's called the Memphis Safe Task Force. It's a federal initiative convened by President Donald Trump. As PBS NewsHour, CNN, and ABC News report, the Trump administration has deployed troops and federal agents to several Democrat-run cities. That includes New Orleans and Washington, D.C., and the administration has cited what it calls an out-of-control crime wave.
And how did Tennessee end up part of that?
In Tennessee, Republican Governor Bill Lee supported the effort and deployed the Guard to back it up. So you've got state and federal cooperation driving this presence in Memphis, but it hasn't been welcomed by everyone. In fact, it's become a real flashpoint, both politically and legally, and this shooting is now adding fuel to that debate.
Let's talk about that local pushback. Who's objecting?
The most prominent voice is Memphis Mayor Paul Young, who's a Democrat. He objected to the federal presence from the start. In response to this shooting, he described it as, quote, an unfortunate incident, end quote. But he's being cautious, too. He said he's waiting for the results of the investigation before he comments any further.
You mentioned legal challenges as well. What's happening in the courts?
There are a couple of tracks here. Back in April, so a few months ago, the Tennessee Court of Appeals ruled that state and local Democratic officials lacked the standing to block the deployment. So that effort to stop it failed. But there's another case still pending. The ACLU is representing 4 Memphis residents in a federal lawsuit right now.
What are those residents alleging?
They claim the task force has retaliated against people for filming law enforcement operations. And they say the task force is enforcing a law that bars people from recording officers within 25 feet. So it touches on questions about the public's right to record police. That lawsuit hasn't been resolved yet, and it could shape how these operations are conducted going forward.
These deployments can't be cheap. What do we know about the cost?
They're enormous, actually. According to the Nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, these deployments cost nearly $500 million through December of last year, and they're expected to exceed $1 billion in total for the year. So we're talking about a very significant federal expenditure spread across these cities.
And is it working? Are they seeing results for that money?
That depends on how you measure it. The U.S. Marshals Service reported back in June that the task force led to more than 10,000 arrests. That's the number supporters point to. But here's the context PBS NewsHour raised. Violent crime in many Democrat-led cities had actually been trending downward from pandemic highs before these deployments even began. So there's a real debate about how much credit the task force can claim.
Let's turn to the investigation now. Who's looking into this shooting?
The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, the TBI, is handling it. They're investigating the circumstances at the request of Shelby County District Attorney Steve Mulroy. And to be clear, no law enforcement officers were injured in this incident. So the investigation is focused squarely on how and why the guardsmen opened fire.
Is this the first violent encounter connected to the task force, or have there been others?
Unfortunately, it's not the first. Data from the TBI shows at least 4 officer-involved shootings tied to the Memphis Safe Task Force. There was one in October 2025, and then 2 more in May of this year. Now, those May incidents did not involve National Guard members firing their weapons, so there's a distinction there. But it does point to a pattern of violent encounters linked to this operation.
So where does yesterday's shooting fit into that pattern?
That's a key question, and it's one authorities aren't answering yet. Both the TBI and the National Guard have declined to say whether Sunday's shooting is the first time National Guard troops have actually discharged their weapons since their deployment began in October. That timeline matters, because the Guard has been on the ground for months now, so the silence on that point leaves a real gap in what the public knows.
Why do you think they're not answering that specific question?
It's hard to say for certain, Grace. Investigations like this are often kept tight while the TBI gathers evidence. But given the political and legal scrutiny we talked about, every detail here carries weight. Whether or not Guard troops had fired before speaks directly to how this mission has been carried out. And with a lawsuit pending and the mayor's objections on record, there's a lot of pressure for transparency.
What are you watching for in the days ahead?
A few things. First, the results of the TBI investigation, which will help clarify exactly what happened in those moments before the shooting. Second, any response from the Trump administration and Governor Bill Lee, since this challenges the rationale for the deployment. And third, whether Johnson's family or the ACLU's lawsuit gains new momentum from this. This is a story where the local grief and the national policy fight are really colliding.
And we should remember, at the center of all this is a young father and musician.
Exactly. Tyron Johnson was 20 years old, with a young child and plans to help lead his family's business. His grandfather and cousin have both spoken out, wanting people to know who he was beyond the headlines. And with no criminal record to speak of, his family is pressing for answers. So as the investigation continues, that human story remains at the heart of it.
Ethan, thank you so much for walking us through all of this. We'll stay on top of it.
Thanks for having me, Grace.
That was our reporter Ethan, with the latest on the fatal shooting of 20-year-old Tyron Johnson in Memphis. We'll bring you updates as the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation continues its work. Stay with us. We're turning now to the global oil market, where OPEC Plus has just made a move that could touch your wallet. Our energy reporter Chloe is here to break it down. Chloe, good morning.
Good morning, Grace. Yes, as of today, July 6th, the OPEC Plus Alliance has announced a modest bump in oil production for the month of August. According to PBS NewsHour, Boston 25 News, and WOKV, all citing the Associated Press, 7 member countries agreed to raise their combined output. Those countries are Saudi Arabia, Russia, Iraq, Kuwait, Kazakhstan, Algeria, and Oman.
And how much more oil are we actually talking about here?
They've agreed to increase their combined output by 188,000 barrels per day. Now that might sound like a lot, but in the world of global oil it's fairly small. What's really notable is the pattern. This marks the 5th consecutive month that OPEC Plus has agreed to raise production, so they've been steadily nudging things upward.
5 months in a row. So what's driving all these increases?
A big part of it is where prices are sitting right now. Global fuel prices have tumbled to levels we haven't seen since before the conflict between Iran and the coalition of the US and Israel. When commodities trading opened Sunday night, Brent crude was trading under $72 a barrel. That's a dramatic drop from the peak back in March, when prices soared to nearly $120 per barrel.
That's a huge swing in just a few months. What changed?
It really comes down to a wave of market optimism around a diplomatic breakthrough. The US and Iran recently reached an interim deal and signed a memorandum of understanding to end their fighting. Under the terms, the US agreed to lift its blockade of Iranian ports. In return, Iran agreed to let ships pass unimpeded through the Strait of Hormuz.
The Strait of Hormuz keeps coming up in these stories. Why does it matter so much?
It's genuinely one of the most important waterways on the planet, Grace. Before the war, roughly 1/5 of the world's oil moved through that single strait. So when it gets choked off, the ripple effects hit fuel prices everywhere. Getting ships flowing through there again is central to why prices have calmed down.
So is traffic through the strait back to normal now?
Not quite. The interim deal has led to an increase in commercial vessel traffic, which is encouraging, but shipping volumes are still below pre-war levels, so the recovery is partial. And the tensions haven't fully disappeared either. As recently as Thursday, Iran's Joint Military Command warned that all oil tankers transiting the strait must stick to approved routes.
What happens if a tanker doesn't follow those routes?
Iran's warning was blunt. They said vessels that don't adhere to approved routes could face a, quote, forceful response, end quote. So even with a deal on paper, shippers are being cautious. That lingering uncertainty is part of why traffic hasn't bounced all the way back, and why the market is watching every headline out of the region so closely.
Let's back up for our listeners. How did this whole crisis start in the first place?
It began in late February with U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran that triggered a severe global energy crisis almost overnight. Because most shipping was blocked in the Strait of Hormuz, many major Middle Eastern producers had to cut production early in the war. Their crude essentially had, quote, nowhere to go, end quote, so they simply stopped pumping as much.
So it wasn't a shortage of oil, but a shortage of places to move it?
Exactly, and that's a key distinction. The oil was there, but the passage out was blocked. OPEC Plus did pledge some production hikes in those early stages, but they were limited. They just weren't enough to counteract the supply shocks that hit the market, and that's a big reason prices spiked so violently in March.
Now that prices are falling, does that mean things are getting back to normal for consumers?
Unfortunately, not right away. Even with these modest production increases and falling crude prices, a full recovery isn't expected immediately. S&P Global Energy estimates that Gulf oil production may not fully rebound until at least the first quarter of 2027. So we're potentially looking at another 6 months or more before supply is truly back to where it was.
That's a long runway. What does that mean for prices at the pump and in the store?
This is the part that hits home for everyday folks. Energy experts are warning that the costs of consumer goods and fuel prices are likely to stay elevated long after the official end of the conflict. So even though Brent crude has dropped sharply, that relief can take a while to filter down. Prices tend to rise fast and fall slowly, and this recovery could follow that same frustrating pattern.
Let's talk strategy. Why is OPEC Plus being so careful with these small increases?
In its official statement, OPEC Plus emphasized a, quote, cautious approach, end quote, to supporting market stability. The group said it will keep monitoring and assessing conditions closely. Analysts point out that the August increase of 188,000 barrels per day is described as, quote, roughly flat, end quote, compared to the previous month. So it's really a measured, deliberate move rather than a big shift.
What's the thinking behind keeping it, as you say, roughly flat?
It's a balancing act. Analysts suggest the increase serves as a precautionary measure to prevent supply shortages during peak summer demand. We're in July now, so this is exactly the stretch when people are driving and traveling most. At the same time, OPEC Plus wants to avoid flooding the market and triggering volatile price swings, so they're threading the needle carefully.
So they're trying to add just enough oil without spooking the market?
That's the essence of it. If they add too much too fast, prices could crash and hurt producers' revenues. If they add too little, drivers and businesses feel the pinch during high summer demand. This slow, steady approach over 5 straight months lets them adjust as the situation with Iran and the Strait of Hormuz continues to evolve.
Chloe, if you're watching this closely, what's the next signal you'll be looking for?
I'll be watching whether shipping traffic through the Strait of Hormuz keeps climbing back toward those pre-war levels. That's really the linchpin. I'll also be listening for any more warnings from Iran's Joint Military Command, like the one on Thursday, because that tension can move prices quickly. And of course, we'll see whether OPEC Plus makes it a 6th straight month of increases when they meet again.
Before we let you go, what's the bottom line takeaway for our viewers this morning?
The big picture is cautiously hopeful, Grace. Prices have fallen dramatically from that nearly $120 peak in March down to under $72 a barrel now. That diplomatic breakthrough between the U.S. and Iran is the main reason, but experts caution the recovery is fragile and incomplete, and consumers may not feel real relief until well into next year.
That's a great summary. Chloe, thank you so much for walking us through all of it this morning.
My pleasure, Grace. I'll keep tracking it and bring you updates as this story develops.
That's our energy reporter, Chloe. And that wraps up our coverage for this morning. Thanks for spending part of your day with us. Here are some other headlines. Turning to global tensions, Russia really rained on the parade early Monday, July 6th, launching a massive assault on Kyiv. The Ukrainian Air Force says more than 350 drones and 66 missiles were unleashed, with 29 ballistic missiles and 18 drones hitting 34 locations. It was a real shock to the system as power outages sparked across Kyiv, Sumy, Kharkiv, and Dnipropetrovsk. While reports on the death toll are a bit up in the air, estimates range from 11 to 14 killed in the city and surroundings. Mayor Vitaly Klitschko reports heavy damage in 4 districts, with Podilsky taking the brunt of the blow and residential buildings in Darnitsky left in ruins. In a disappointing turn, none of the 29 ballistic missiles were intercepted, a gap in the armor President Zelensky blames on a shortage of Patriot interceptor missiles. Zelensky noted the timing was typical of Putin, striking after American Independence Day and right before the NATO summit in Ankara. Russia claims they were just hitting high-precision military and energy targets in retaliation. Meanwhile, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen says Ukraine is in dire need of more air defense. All this comes as President Donald Trump heads to Turkey after a 90-minute business-like call with Vladimir Putin on July 4th. Switching gears to the Pacific, Super Typhoon Bavi has made a catastrophic landfall near Guam, specifically tearing through Rota. With winds screaming at 180 miles per hour, this Category 5 beast has left major damage and flooding in its wake. Governor Lou Leon Guerrero told residents to hunker down, while the National Weather Service warned Rota residents that the wind felt like a tornado. It is a rough break for the 210,000 residents who are still recovering from previous storms. The UN says record ocean temperatures and El Niño have really fueled the fire for these intensifying storms. Speaking of fire, Colorado is feeling the heat as fast-growing wildfires have forced entire towns to evacuate and destroyed hundreds of structures. In sports, FIFA has played a risky game by lifting the red card suspension for U.S. forward Folarin Balogun. Balogun was originally sidelined for stepping on a player's ankle during a win against Bosnia-Herzegovina. After President Trump and his team reached out to FIFA President Gianni Infantino, the suspension was tossed out for a 1-year probationary period. Trump called it a victory over injustice, but Belgium is absolutely floored, with coach Rudy Garcia calling the move a joke. UEFA says FIFA crossed a red line, and legends like Wayne Rooney say the decision stinks. Finally, in Israel, things are hitting a roadblock as ultra-Orthodox Jews protest against military service. Long-time exemptions are gone, leading to highway blockades and arrests as some refuse to draft. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.8, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.